Alright, hello everyone, this is Matthew, and today we're going to be looking into this recent commission I got of Paris. We've got the Eiffel Tower, we've got buildings on the right, buildings on the left. Overall, there's just a lot going on, and today I'm going to be talking about my mindset, my techniques, and my thought process and everything when I'm going about sketching something about this, because I know it can look really overwhelming to just look at all these things going on at once. But there are so many ways that you can break this down and make it simple so that anybody can do this, and hopefully it makes you more confident and comfortable in your skills. So yeah, let's get into it. Alright, and before we get into the actual techniques in this video, I want to make a disclaimer that this is specifically talking about realism sketching, where we're looking at a reference photo and we're trying to make comparisons between that and recreate that photo on canvas with drawing or painting, anything like that. Now, if that isn't 100% your goal, this video might not be the perfect video for you. However, I think you'll still find, if you stick around, some techniques or just ways to think about things that might help you in yours. So yeah, let's get right into it. Alright, and starting this all off, I'm going to be going over what I believe are the three core components of realism, or just drawing period, where you've got, first of all, your details. Especially in realism, that's something you think about, all the little details you put into your piece. Number two, I think about contrast with your shadows and your highlights. And number three, and last but not least at all, are proportions. And your proportions are your sketch, making sure it doesn't look elongated or slouched, anything like that, making sure that everything looks proper, exactly how you want it. And in this case, exactly like how the reference picture has of it. And details are so vital whenever it comes to realism and making stuff, and especially contrast too, but I always find it to be extremely difficult to add those details and add the contrast that you want when you're constantly having to adjust your proportions because they're just off. You can have the best details in the world, best contrast in the world, but if your proportions are wrong, it's going to look wrong. So it's extremely vital to make sure that you've got a good sketch to build off of. And not only that, when you've got a really rock solid sketch, it's easier to add the details. It's easier to add the contrast. It's easier to, it takes less time because you're not having to fix problems that you should have solved before that. So yeah, let's get into our actual drawing software here and get started. So as you can see, we're in the drawing software now, and I've got my canvas on the left and the reference photo on the right. And my very first tip for you is to make your canvas and your reference photo the same ratio. Now in this case, the commission was to be 8" by 10". So I made sure my canvas was that size, and then I made sure my reference image was that size. And there's a few different reasons we do that. First of all, when you're just looking between the two, you can make so many connections that you can't make when they're two different sizes. And second of all, in this technique, we are directly using so much information about the reference image that when things don't line up perfectly, it's going to give you so many problems, and it's going to make this a nightmare. And my technique that I use in this will not work any other way. So yeah, before we even make a single line on our canvas, make sure that your canvas and your drawing reference photo that you're using are the same size. Okay, and now specific technique wise, I'm going to go over two different things. I kind of made them up, but this is the way I think about it. There are two components whenever I'm sketching. There's two different kind of lines that we're going to make. We're going to look at base guidelines, and then we're going to look at bonus guidelines. So we're going to put bonus guidelines to the side for now and specifically talk about base guidelines. Now, what am I talking about? A base guideline is going to be something in the reference photo that is touching the outside of the image. And you might be asking, what do you mean outside the image? What I'm specifically talking about is the very edge perimeter around the image. So let's just go, for example, this will make it a lot more clear. Let's look at the right buildings there, over there on the right. Let's look at the very top of them. Now, you can see exactly where the right buildings touch the edge of the image. That point right there is something that is extremely vital to us, and this is exactly why our canvas and our reference photo are the same size. Now we can see how far that is from the right and from the left, and then use that information and apply that to our drawing and make those lines. Now, I call these base guidelines because they're touching the base of the image, and they're going to be touching the base of our canvas. These are things and points in our drawing that we can guarantee are correct with a very high level of certainty. So just some others to point out. If we look at the bottom of the building, we're going to look over on the left there, and we can see where the building cuts off, and we can see how far it is from the right, how far to the left. Take note of that and apply that to our drawing. So just to see that in actual practice, let's look over here. In the very first line we make, we're going back to the left side of the right buildings, and we make that line, and there is a base guideline. It's very simple. You can just see, you don't have to be exactly perfect, but as long as you get those rough ratios right, you're doing good. So we've got that, and now I'm going to make a very common mistake. So in this case, I'm going to go from that guideline and try to guess the slope. Notice why I said guess, because it is extremely hard to just eyeball it the exact angle. If you can do it, more power to you, but it is extremely hard, and I find whenever I'm guessing like that, that's exactly when I'm making corrections and it's taking forever and I'm going back and forth and back and forth. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the outside of the image, and then we're going to find where the top of the buildings touches the edge of the picture. We're going to meet that, and then now we're going to connect those, the slope through there, and now we've got an angle that we are very confident in. And so that is what I mean by finding base guidelines. And I want you to think about it. If you're doing a puzzle, for example, I think this is a pretty good analogy. When you're doing a puzzle, you start on the outside. Why do you do that? It's because it's the easiest thing that you can guarantee is right. The exact same is for when you're sketching something. Find the details that are important, that are touching the outside, and work in, because you can build off of those just like a puzzle. Alright, moving along, we are going to go ahead and go to the left side buildings here, and you can see I'm finding those guidelines there where they're touching the edge of the canvas, and then I'm connecting them. Now, connecting them is what I call a bonus guideline, because there's some of these that do not touch the edge of the canvas. So how do you know if they're correct? Well, I want you to think about these guidelines as now an extension from the outside. Like when we did the right side of the building, the right buildings, we've got the base guideline there on the bottom and on the top, but that connecting one isn't touching the actual base of the image. So that's what I call a bonus one. You're building off of it. So now, since we know those are just as correct as the ones touching the outside, we can then use those exactly like how we used the outside. So moving along, we also did the Eiffel Tower there with the little core in it. Let's see how I'm doing. I'm building off of the new bonus guideline. That was the slope of the roof. And the reason why I'm able to use these again is because we know that slope is correct. How do we know the slope is correct? Because we're using base guidelines with our image. So you can find all of the details in this are either going to be a base or a bonus guideline. All of the lines I make in this. So for example, with the Eiffel Tower, we did the little core of it. I'll call that the spine, just to replicate the angle of it. That would be a base detail. It's not directly touching the outside of the image, but it's so close. And then that is connecting down onto a bonus one because it's connecting off of a slope, as you can see there. So it's a little bit complicated to think about at first, but once you get the hang of it, it will make your drawing life so much easier. And you don't have to specifically go in there and measure every single detail, but being able to acknowledge these distances, whether that be from how high it is or low it is in comparison on the edge of the photo, or how far left and right it is, those connections will really help you, especially whenever you're trying to do realism and connect it to a reference photo. So yeah, let's go on to the next tip. Alright, so we've got our very, very, very rough looking sketch going on here. It doesn't really look like anything as of yet, but now when we're going to the Eiffel Tower, let's think about a few things. So we've got the spine of it, and the reason why I did the spine of it is because when you think of the Eiffel Tower, you think of so many different shapes, and all of that is going to be a nightmare to try to just go in and wing it and go through all of those little lines. We don't need to worry about that right now. That is for later. So the first thing that we did there is we found the direct, what I called it earlier was the spine of it, where what is the general direction that this line is going in. And that's what we found here. And we connected that to the outside of the image, and we connected it down on the building, and comparing it, how far left and right everything is, all that jazz, and we found that. But how do you get the outside of it? That's the tricky part, and this is where the next tip comes in. So you can see here that I'm trying to build up this curve. There's two ways to think about this, and the second way is going to be the game changer, most likely for all of you. So, of course, I'm trying to replicate the curve that you're seeing on that side of the Eiffel Tower, but the big thing that I want you to think about is you're not only making the Eiffel Tower, you're making another shape. And you're probably thinking, what are you even talking about? Well, whenever you're drawing, yes, you're making a shape by making the Eiffel Tower, but you got to think about the other side of things. Look at the space between the Eiffel Tower and the building. That's a shape in of itself. It kind of looks like a semicircle. It sort of, I suppose. You see what I'm saying there, though. But that's also a shape that you want to replicate. You don't only think about the curve that you're drawing there. You think about how it's affecting the other shapes around it. So in this case, for example, yes, I want the curve to be right while I'm drawing it, but now I can check myself. This is something that is very hard to check. So here's the two ways to check. First of all, we've got our spine, and we're going to look the distance between how far my line is away from the spine of the Eiffel Tower. But now I'm also looking back at the whole image, and I'm like, is this shape reminiscent of the shape that is being created in the reference photo? And if it's not, that's when you need to do your adjustments and get it correct, because when those are out of whack, you might not even understand what's wrong, but something's wrong. So now we can go and move over onto the left side of the Eiffel Tower, and again, I'm not only trying to replicate, obviously, the Eiffel Tower's angle itself, but that's kind of hard to guess. So I'm looking at the shape I'm making with the connection of the left side buildings and with the sky. And so when you start thinking about that is when you start really checking yourself and really making sure that all the lines that you're doing are adding up together and everything looks right. Alright, so applying everything that we just got into, we're now going to look into the sky, and I'm going to use the sky as a little bit of a test so you can try and think this one out for yourself. So as you can see, we've got some stuff on the bottom and some stuff on the top in the sky, and I want you to think, how would you go about this to make it accurate, and where can you check yourself? So I'll give you a few seconds and then I'll come back and then see if we get the same answers. Alright, I'm back, and so just getting right into it, the very first thing that I would do is I would look, are there any details that touch the outside of the image? And in this case, yes, there is. There you can see on the top of this, we can see exactly where that is touching the left side of the image, the top part of the sky. And then is it touching anything else? It's touching a few other things. First of all, it's touching the Eiffel Tower, and we can see where that connects on our Eiffel Tower, but it also is connecting on the building. So that gives us a few reference points that we're actually being able to look at here and making sure our shape is correct. So going in and sketching that, I'm making sure all my connections are connecting right, and not only are we making sure that line looks correct, we're looking at above it, are we making any shapes? In this case, it's kind of looking like a little wonky rectangle. Are we creating that shape? Yes, we're creating that shape. Great. Now looking at the bottom, is it connecting to anything? Can I use any guidelines? Yes, it's touching the buildings on the right, and it's touching the Eiffel Tower and the left of it. So let's recreate that. Now, this is the kicker. If you caught this, then you're really starting to understand it. Yes, we're recreating the angles. Yes, we've got a rounded shape on the bottom, and we've got a rectangular shape on the top. But what else are we making? Well, there's a shape in the middle. Now, if you caught on to that, good job. That's the kind of thing that's really hard to get into your head. And if you all are doing it, that's great, because I know it took me a long time to finally get into the routine of doing that. But we're also making a shape in the middle. And that shape there, it kind of looks like a cone, I guess. That's a terrible description, but if you found that and you're able to look at that, you're being able to check yourself in so many different aspects And if just one of those aspects is incorrect, then you can go in and fix it, and you can be certain that your sketch is looking good. So if you got that, really good job. And yeah, let's just move on to the rest of the sketch. Alright, so moving on, there's really not any new information that I can give you when it comes to this. It just boils down to just purely practice and practice and practice. And there's a few different ways that I found to be really helpful with that. First of all, this is going to sound a little random, but I mentioned looking for all those little shapes. One thing I really think would help you is to either print out an image or put an image in your drawing software and just trace over it. And I don't just mean like, you know, the eyes and the hair if it's a person, or just the outlines of the buildings. Trace over the hidden shapes that you might not have seen before. Like, for example, the cone in this one in the sky. Stuff like that that you might not have seen before. And that'll really train your brain to look for those additional shapes that not only will allow you to have better proportions, but then you might see detail a different way. You might see contrast a different way. And it'll give you a whole different way to look at your drawing, and hopefully give you that confidence and that way to check yourself to make sure that you're doing things right. And another thing is just drawing. Basically, drawing anything is practice, even if you don't like it in the end. If you learn something, I heard this from Bob Ross, so don't think I created that at all. But if you learned something, it wasn't a waste of time. So just draw and practice, and even if you're not happy with what your drawings are looking like now, I promise you'll get there. And I really hope that these techniques that I went over today help you a little bit. And if you've got any other input or any questions, feel free to drop a comment, or I've got my email linked in the description of this video, and if you want to reach out to me, I'll do my best to try to help you. And yeah, so I'm gonna let the rest of this sketch play, and I really hope this helped you. This is one of my first tutorials I've ever made, so if you've got any suggestions or advice or anything at all, feel free to let me know, and I'll be looking through the comments. So yeah, I hope you enjoy. Have a great day.